In this video, I want to talk about gas. It is, without doubt, the #1 requested topic I get, and that is understandable because Russia is using gas as a weapon in the war with Ukraine to put pressure on Europe. So there is something to cover, and here we go. But the reason why I haven't covered it before is that I don't actually think gas is going to have a significant impact on the war. So since I do military analysis, it's a bit like covering a non-topic. So I guess if you want to save some time, you can just stop the video here, or you can watch until the end, and I will tell you why I think Russia has some really bad assumptions about how they're going to win the war. Russia is using gas as a weapon in the Ukraine war. The idea is that Ukraine is dependent on Western support to continue the war, so if the West loses determination to support Ukraine, then Russia will win the war. So Russia's strategy is therefore to try to increase the costs of the war for the West so that we will be motivated to end the war. And a key weapon in this strategy is gas supplies to Western Europe. Russia is slowly but steadily reducing the deliveries of gas, and I think there is a very good chance that the supplies are going to stop entirely. The official Russian story is that they're not cutting the supplies, but that this is actually technical difficulties that are caused by the European sanctions against Russia. So if you see somebody writing that in the comments to this video, just know that it is wrong. There is actually plenty of available capabilities to deliver gas, both through the Nord Stream 1 pipeline and also through the pipeline that runs through Ukraine. But Russia is using this as an excuse to put pressure on Europe. And the official narrative is that European politicians are so stupid that they are implementing sanctions that hurt Europe more than Russia. Then the Russian news is full of stories about how the economy in Western Europe is totally trash because of the gas shortage and how Europeans are going to freeze in the winter and all those things. So when you watch the Russian news, you get the impression that Europe is about to break. Or in fact, you can just see that narrative just by reading the comments to my videos, because it seems to be one of the top talking points for the Russian internet trolls that write angry YouTube comments. And while the official story is that Russia would love to deliver more gas if only Europe would let them, then there is also a clear recognition that in reality, this is about Ukraine, because pretty much every military analysis that you see in Russia talks about how the West will stop supporting Ukraine when it gets cold so that they can get the gas back. And in theory, this sounds simple, but in reality, I think there is a pretty long and complicated chain of assumptions about how the gas crisis is connected to the war. And it is this chain of assumptions that I want to unfold. So to start with, it is an assumption that the crisis is going to be severe. If this is just a small crisis that is handled well, then it's not going to work. And when you follow the Russian media, then you get the idea that this is an incredibly serious situation for Europe, that this is a life and death situation, and that Europeans are going to freeze to death when the winter comes. But look, that's not actually what we're talking about. There is plenty of gas in Europe for the households. People are not going to freeze, and there will also be gas for cooking and stuff like that. What we're actually looking at is that there might not be enough gas for the industry. And that is going to have an impact on the economy. So we may have a recession and we will have less money than we otherwise would, but it's not like people are going to freeze or that there won't be electricity or stuff like that. So in other words, we're looking at a much smaller crisis than the one they're talking about on Russian TV. And I think it is a big question mark about whether the crisis will be severe enough for this scenario. So, okay, that was the first questionable assumption, but let's say that the crisis is severe enough and people are ready to accept drastic measures to get more energy. Then we get to the next assumption, and that is that the Europeans will see Russia as a part of the solution to the crisis. And this is actually not a trivial consideration, because the solution to a gas deficit does not have to be more Russian gas. It could also be other kinds of energy like coal or nuclear, or it could be also energy saving measures like what have you, reduced speed limits on the roads or colder water in public swimming pools and stuff like that. So there are actually several other ways that Europe could go than sucking up to Russia. And I think Russia is underestimating the degree to which they have basically disqualified themselves as energy providers for Europe with this behavior. But okay, let's say that the energy crisis is really bad and Europe believes that the only mitigation would be to normalize the relationship with Russia. Then we get to another assumption, which is that Westerners are unwilling to endure hardship. This is an assumption that is actually quite deeply ingrained in the way that many Russians think about themselves in the West. There's this idea that Russians are much more capable of self-sacrifice than the Westerners, that despite all our talk about values and stuff, then the only value that the West really cares about is consumerism, right? So instead of accepting the realities of a winter where we would have to sacrifice some of our usual perks to get everybody through, then we would rather sacrifice the Ukrainians because like no way we could live without the annual ski holiday, right? So, but I think the Russian policymakers are absolutely wrong about this assumption. Like the Europeans are much more willing to endure hardship than they think. And when it comes down to it, I'm quite confident that most Europeans do understand that the sacrifice they're making is much smaller than what the Ukrainians have to live through. But okay, let's say the gas crisis gets really big. Europe believes that Russia can again be trusted to deliver gas, and they are also willing to stop the support for Ukraine to normalize the relationship with Russia. Then there is another important caveat, like it is basically assumed that Europe can persuade the United States to stop their support for Ukraine as well. Because let's be honest, when it comes down to it, then it is the United States much more than Europe that is providing the weapons that Ukraine needs for the war. And if Europe stops their support for Ukraine, but the United States is still continuing, then it won't really have that much effect on the battlefield. And I must say that I think there is pretty much zero chance that the US is going to stop their support for Ukraine. And the reason for this is simple. This is not just about Ukraine and Russia, but about the entire world order. And by that, I basically mean it's about China and Taiwan. For the United States, it is absolutely essential that China can see that this kind of behavior leads to disaster. Because if Russia gets away with invading Ukraine, then China might try something similar with Taiwan. And then the United States will have much bigger problems than they have already. So Russia has to lose. And this is not a question that is partisan in these states. Like both Democrats and Republicans agree that China must be deterred from invading their neighbors and that Russia has to lose. So what I'm saying here is really that Europe is on the receiving end of Russia's pressure. Like Europe has to live with the consequences of the gas shortage. But it is not up to the Europeans whether the West is providing weapons to Ukraine or not, because it is the Americans who make that decision. The final assumption in all this is, of course, that if the West stops providing weapons, then Ukraine will stop fighting. So let's run the thought experiment again. It's winter, and the gas crisis in Europe turns out to be much more severe than people right now seem to believe that it will be. The Europeans then get to the conclusion that Russia can again be trusted to deliver gas, and they also decide that they are willing to sacrifice Ukraine to avoid going down in living standards. Then the United States agrees to stop their support for Ukraine as well because they feel sorry for the Europeans. Like, I guess the Americans have changed their mind and they no longer believe that Europe should pay that much money for defense and security. So in this, I think, quite unlikely scenario, I think it's pretty much guaranteed that Ukraine will not just accept defeat and surrender. Like, they would continue fighting, and Zelensky would probably do some more of that speech magic that he does so well to try to get the support back. Like, winter is not that long, so Ukraine would only need to keep it going for a few months before the gas crisis in Europe would basically solve itself, at least until next winter. So this is basically the chain of assumptions that I think have to be true for Russia to succeed with this strategy of using gas as a pressure point. I think all of these assumptions are weak. And when you put them together, I think it's almost unthinkable. Because if just one of them is wrong, then the whole strategy will fail. So that is why I don't think a gas crisis is going to have a significant impact on the war in Ukraine. Like, these are two more or less unrelated crises. There is a war in Ukraine and there is a gas crisis. And they have sort of the same root cause because they both exist because Russia decided to invade Ukraine, but they don't share a solution. Like, I guess it's like if there is a car accident and then there is an injury to a person and damage on the car, like, both are caused by the same incident, but there is really no connection between the solutions. Like, you treat the person at the hospital and the car goes to the repair shop. And it's the same thing here. And the sooner the Europeans start seeing the gas crisis and the war in Ukraine as two separate and unrelated problems, the better. Okay, if you found this video interesting, please give it a like. It will tell YouTube to promote it more so more people will see it. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again next time.